All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 11:30, so we will get started. I want to first welcome you to Virtual Voices. This is a series that we created when this pandemic started as a way to ensure our alumni stay engaged and informed and connected with the issues that matter. It started with a real focus on COVID, but we have since turned our focus, not turned our focus, but are adding focus areas that are incredibly relevant to our times today, racial equity being one of them on the top of the list. So we are thrilled to have three amazing speakers. First, I want to start off with a few just Zoom guidelines. This will be recorded. Please ask that you stay on mute unless I call on you. Questions are going to be sent through the chat feature. We're going to use the chat box as much as possible today. I've got a few added things that I want to try with you guys. But if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat feature. I will see that and then call on you if you want to ask it live. If you sent in a question prior to, then we will make sure to ask that as well. And I may call on you in case you want to ask that out loud. I also want to thank our sponsors. The work that we do as alumni and as Alumni Network is not possible without our sponsors. Molson Coors, Southwest, and TIAA have really been longtime partners in the work we're doing with the alumni work. I know Kayla Garcia is on the call from Molson Coors, a tremendous partner that really cares deeply about how we're interacting with our community. And Southwest Airlines, I think Lexi is also on the call, a truly fantastic thought leader and partner in the work that we're doing. So I truly appreciate them being here. I know our good friends at TIAA, our contact is on maternity leave right now, so I'm hoping she is well and enjoying that. But thank you to our sponsors. We sure do appreciate all of you. I'm now going to go into just some quick bios of our speakers. We are incredibly thrilled to have these three amazing leaders to give their perspectives, thoughts, and just have a really raw, authentic conversation. So I'm going to do a quick bio of each of them, and then we're going to get started. Priya Burkett is the co-founder of the Burkett Family Foundation. She has held positions in multinational consulting firms like Capgemini, Ernst & Young, and tech startups based out of Palo Alto. In addition to 15 years at a local energy company, you can guess which one, she was most recently a leader for the sales organization at American Express. She's now engaged entrepreneurially with the Fly Fisher Group. Many of you know that. She is the chairman of the board for the Denver Public Schools Foundation, Colorado Women's Chamber Top 25 Most Powerful Women, and we're honored to say that she was one of our 9 News Leader of the Year finalists in 2018. So well deserved for that honor. She's also a very proud member of LD Sweet 16, they call it. Thank you, Priya. We're so thrilled to have you as an alum and to be on this call with us. Rob Cohen. Rob is the chairman and CEO of the IMA Financial Group. Under Rob's leadership, IMA has enjoyed an unprecedented growth and now has more than 800 associates across the country. Rob has served on numerous nonprofit boards, hard to count them all in the Denver community, but has served on in the past board chair for most of them. Most recently, Rob chaired the boards of the Downtown Denver Partnership, Visit Denver, MSU Board of Trustees, and he is the past chair of the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce and the Leadership Foundation, a founding board member of Colorado I Have a Dream Foundation, and a member of the board of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Foundation and the Olympic and Paralympic Museum, among many others. And Rob, I heard that the museum opened today in Colorado Springs. If that's the same one, it looks really neat. He's also an alum of LD 1991. I'm sorry I aged you, but we're thrilled to have you on here, Rob. I think you were part of it when you were 15, so no big deal. And then we've got Reggie Miller. Reggie is the Vice President of Global Inclusion and Diversity at VF Corporation, where he directs, develops, and operationalizes the company's global I&D strategy with a focus on transformational change. Prior to joining VF, he was the Director of Diversity Strategy and Support, responsible for the D&I strategy, reporting, and consultation for all Walmart stores in the US. He is a U.S. Army veteran. Reggie served as a supply sergeant with deployments to several different countries. He's currently very active on boards and committees across the country. Thank you, Reggie, for your service. Thank you for all you're doing, and we really appreciate you being here as well. Okay, let's get started. I want to start with something a little bit different here, and I'm going to ask speakers also to be a part of this. Speakers and audience to be a part of this. If you guys want to get your chat feature up and running, but I want to start this call, I saw this on another call, by asking our speakers when they start to speak, if you could just let us know what identities are you bringing to this conversation? I think it's important to just understand where people are coming from, how they identify. And so I'll start just by saying, I'm a woman, I'm white, I'm a mother, and I'm very passionate about this work. So I am thrilled to be here. If you are interested in sharing in the chat feature what your identity is that you're bringing to this conversation, we'd love to see that. And I'm going to start, Priya, with you. We've had some really wonderful conversations about your theory on this assumption of power. Will you expand on that and then follow it up with how critical and how important you feel it is for people of color to have sponsors?
Absolutely. So I will start with my lens. I would say my lens is an Indian woman growing up till high school in Section 8 housing, wife of a Black man, and a mother raising 3 Black teenagers. So that is my lens. As far as your question specifically about the importance of sponsors, I'm going to be speaking with a corporate lens versus a community lens or the lens of a mother or a wife. But through my corporate lens, assumption of power can be inferred through titles. And yes, majority have earned it due to their hard work, absolutely. But much is attributed to their network. It's their network, in many cases, their sponsors that have vouched for them and spoke on their behalf. Why? Because they know each other through work or non-work interactions. These powerful interactions, the reason I call them powerful is because of the titles and the people in the room. And a lot of those interactions are done in programs and on boards. And when you look at the makeup of those top titles of companies and boards and programs, you can quickly see that very few of those individuals are diverse in their race or ethnicity. And my younger self used to provide the excuse of, oh, there's not as many Black or brown people. That's why. However, when you look at these same rooms in the New York City or Washington, D.C. or more diverse cities, it is still the same thing. Most of them are primarily white and most of them are men. That's just what our company was founded on. I've just taken a whole road trip, learned a lot about, a lot more, about all of this. Although most of it is read and very much observed, however, you can kind of see. And really quick, a lot of it is also fueled by the wealth gap between just specifically access for brown people to have that education and have that opportunity. This is why sponsorship for Black and brown men and women, regardless of where they are in their career, is vital. It not only helps open the doors, it helps keep them in their roles because a sponsor gives them the grace that one would give a non-Black or brown person. Does that make sense when I say grace? And I can talk more about it later as well, but.
No, that's great, Priya, thank you. I saw Priya speak recently in another one of these, and the passion you have behind that and the importance of what you're saying is so real and something we all need to hear. So I appreciate you expanding on that, and we'll get more into it here in a bit probably. Reggie, I want to ask you next, you work on a global level. I'm curious what your colleagues in other parts of the world are saying about our fight for racial justice here in the United States, and how is it similar or different from what they might be experiencing?
So thank you, and really quickly, I show up as an African-American man, a father, a husband, a veteran, and I could probably add a number of different things additional to that. One of the interesting things that we saw when we began to really take action on how our approach would be to responding to everything was one, just the global outreach that we saw. I was on a call with one of our brands, Icebreaker, that is based in New Zealand, and they were talking about the fact that there were protests happening there in regards to the killing of George Floyd and obviously Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and others. And so the reaction to this inflection point within the US has really resonated globally. And even as we begin our work, and maybe later on I can talk about some of the actions that we took, we've seen that other parts of the world, and even specifically our employees and associates have said, hey, we want to be part of this change too. So I think sometimes we think that it is just a US problem or a U.S. issue, but truly as we think about the fight for racial equality, that's something that resonates everywhere. And although it may look a little different in the Asia Pacific region or in Europe or in other parts of the world, it resonates globally for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that VF and you have been doing this work for a very long time. And so it's interesting to hear like what the differences are now compared to then, and we'll get into that, but I appreciate the work VF has done for so very long. Rob, you have recently started and helped to create the CEO Pledge. Many of you may have heard of this, but Rob, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about the CEO Pledge and why you're a part of this, why you believe it's so important in this fight against racial equity.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you for having me a part of this. Obviously, I am a white male, a father, and a husband, and I was raised Jewish. My wife is Catholic, so I'm in an interfaith marriage, but also, which I think is germane to this entire discussion that we're about to have, is, you know, you shouldn't judge anybody by the way they look. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood where my neighborhood school was primarily African American, and before busing, I was one of 13 whites at a school that had over 400 students in it. And so, you know, this is something that I've been living with since I was a little kid. And so we'll get into that maybe a little bit more, but that's the lens that I bring to this. And so the CEO Pledge is very simply a collaborative effort of CEOs to come together to speak up and to actually take action. My biggest concern when I saw all of this kind of starting, and by the way, not starting, but restarting, a discussion that's been going on for hundreds of years, not only in this country, but around the world, was, you know, how do we make sure that we don't just have words and that we actually have some actions that come out of this? And so I started to grab a group of other CEOs, and Jandel Allen Davis and Paul Washington and Laura Love and Tammy Dorr and Kelly Brough and a whole bunch of other CEOs, and then reached out to organizations, Be Civic and the Denver Chamber and the Downtown Denver Partnership, and said, is there a way that we could put a collaborative effort? The first thing I'd like to say is I want to thank everyone, because the first thing people said is, before we do anything, we need to listen. We need to spend a little bit more time listening and learning and really understanding what the issues are. And I would say the idea has morphed from its original formation to today because of that advice. And so I just want to throw that out, that was very valuable feedback for us. Because, you know, I think most of us, when we see something that's wrong, we want to jump right to action. And sometimes even in light of very difficult situations, patience is a good thing, not a virtue I really necessarily have, but an important one. And we wanted it to be more than a pledge. We wanted there to be accountability, which is one of the reasons that we asked all the companies who were CEOs who are part of the pledge to actually commit to publicly saying what their goals are and then publicly publishing the results. And those will be put on the Be Civic website. So not only can we hold ourselves accountable and hold each other accountable, but the community can hold us accountable. And then the last thing I'd say before I actually get into what it is we wanted it to not just be about large business or mid-sized business. We wanted it to be about all businesses, because all businesses can have an impact on, you know, really inequities that we see in the marketplace. And so what we're asking these CEOs and ultimately these companies to pledge is to do what we did to start. First, listen and learn. So to listen to what their both internal and external constituents are saying, to learn themselves as individual leaders, but also to help their associates and the people that they work with learn and understand, because that's a big part of this process, but then to take action. And we can get into that more in the discussion, but, you know, to take action around improving recruitment and hiring and advancing careers for all people, to encourage diversity in your partnerships and in your businesses that you reach out to, and really in all of your relationships, to donate funds to organizations that we feel like are dealing with social injustice, racial injustice, whatever the issues are, to get our associates to register to vote and to encourage them to get out to vote, because voting matters. and then to actively support minority-owned businesses in our communities. And then maybe most importantly is to join and partner with community-based organizations that are already doing really great work. What we don't need to do is create more nonprofits, more organizations that are already doing work. And so if you think about it, the CEO Pledge is kind of the what, and then we're partnering with organizations on the how. So many of you probably saw the inclusive economy and how many of us came out to support that. That's an example of an organization that's already doing amazing work in the hiring and advancement and recruiting of people. And so we're leaning in and helping that organization. And we're going to want to find similar organizations that help us with healthcare reform, criminal justice reform, education reform, all of these different things. So that's a quick synopsis of kind of what we're trying to do, Elizabeth.
Oh, that's great, and it's incredibly useful to hear that, and I applaud you for taking those steps, and you've got the right idea, and each of you kind of referenced the importance of taking an action, and that's so incredibly important. So I'm going to go into a question that I think kind of connects with this is, what suggestions can you guys offer to help organizations kind of move beyond just that checking a box for the work around DEI? What are some tangible action steps that they can take within their organizations? The first to unmute, I'll take on. Rob, you're already unmuted, so.
Well, I'm the simplest one to answer, and first of all, what I would say is, a lot of people might be wondering why I'm on this call, and I think some of the challenges that I've seen is most of these calls are done with people of color and expressing what they see, and I think the majority, if that's what you want to call a white male, the majority needs to stand up and equally be heard. And although I have not experienced the same thing that our communities of color have experienced, I know the difference between right and wrong. And so I think, the first thing people need to do is to be willing to lean in, stand up and be heard, and to say when they see things that they don't think are right. And it's not always comfortable. It's not always easy. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. To do that, peer pressure has always been a challenge. But this is one of those times where right and wrong is very clear, and people need to lean in, and we need to work together and collaborate and do that. And then obviously I want companies and CEOs to join the CEO Pledge and to commit to doing something as opposed to just talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. Reggie, what about you? What can we do in our organizations that goes beyond checking the box?
Yeah, I think it starts with, essentially some of the leadership that Rob and the other peers that he has on the pledge is showing, and that's commitment, and true commitment. I think that talking is one thing, but the action has to be quickly followed with that. And that action can't be something that is focused on just the immediacy of now, but the long term of direction, not only where we're heading as a company, but also the sort of worldview of where we're heading as well. And so whenever I start to try and do this work, I really start focusing on a couple of things. And I think one is no different than what Rob mentioned, and that's listening to the employees within your company to truly understand where they are on this topic, so that you have a good idea of where you need to go. It is also important in that listening to have an understanding of where you're trying to go as an organization as well. What are the things and values that align with who you are and how that really relates to what we're trying to tackle. And I think at this stage, there are both a couple things that are involved with that. One, truly, what is your approach on how you're going to tackle racial inequality? And then the greater idea of how you tackle inclusion and belonging as an organization. How do you make your organization, regardless of its size, a place where anyone can feel like they have not only a true place where they can transform their career, but where they feel comfortable, welcome and safe when they walk through those doors or when they log on, because walking through the doors doesn't really happen that much right now in this COVID situation. And so I think it starts with having a goal in mind really setting some short-term and long-term aspirations, and then really focus in on not just the tone from the top, but this idea of how you get the entire organization involved in making change.
I appreciate saying that, because we often say it's got to come from the top, but it's really got to be a part of everybody's desires for that. So thank you, Reggie. Priya, what about you? What else can we do?
Yeah, I agree with everything that everybody said, like specifically Rob about allyship and Reggie about commitment. And one of the things that I am working in my own way to influence is it's not only about hiring Black and brown people, right? And listening to them. Yes, that is a huge part. Don't get me wrong. We have affinity groups and companies. We have all kinds of HR programs to find access and, you know, bring people in. It's, in my opinion, I feel like, and I believe this is a technical term, and we have up-teen programs on this through nonprofits, etc. I believe it's about once they're in the door, how can we anticipate what their challenges could be and help them grow, right? This is evident by the very high rate of Black and brown people dying of COVID, because their foot's in the door. They're in a company. They're in the lowest level positions on average across the United States of America, right? This is America. India is different. Africa, we're talking about this, like United States, right? Most of them are dying because they're in those lower positions with very little ability to grow on the front lines. And it's once you're in the door, now companies, now what do you think that what kind of skill do we think that they need, right? Because if they don't have that network, if somebody didn't tell me, Elizabeth, to go to Leadership Denver, I'm not from here. My parents are from India, was on welfare through high school, right? I mean, until high school. My point is, I didn't have that network until I sought it out and somebody was like, I'm gonna put you in this program. So much changes pre-LD, post-LD. Those that have been through the program can attest to that. And that's my thing, is that's what a company can do. A company can say, once you're in the door, how can we help you be successful?
And that's part of that belonging that Reggie talked about too. Yeah, yes. Finding that way to guide and belong. I love that. I want to move to a question from the audience that was pre-posted. And Brian Cook, if you're interested or willing to unmute and ask this, you did submit it earlier on, so let me know. If not, before you unmute though, I do want to offer up this chat feature again. If you guys have, as an audience, as our alumni, resources or articles or things you want to share with this group, I would love for you to include those in the chat feature. We're going to compile this list and make sure that we send it out with a wrap up as well. So if you've got anything you want to share, please do add that into the chat feature. And Brian, I'm watching to see if you unmute, if you want to ask the question. Otherwise, I can ask on your behalf.
Hey, thanks so much, Elizabeth. Can you hear me?
Certainly, loud and clear.
Great. So, yeah, in this moment, it seems that there's great enthusiasm about the opportunity for awareness. And we've been talking already about taking action. I'm curious, as you think about allies and people joining the conversation, you know, what are some of the biggest impediments that you all see to folks aligning themselves to a real fight for equity and justice?
I'm watching for the first unmute of our speakers.
You know, I would start with just knowledge of the issues, to be quite honest, and really understanding that from the perspective of someone that might be different than you is probably an initial impediment, right? You don't necessarily have to have a label behind you to know that when you're talking about this, you want to be informed. And sometimes that has not been your life experience, and that's nothing to be shy about, but it can be something that makes you hesitate when you think about how to get involved. And so one of the things that we did as an organization is both in our stores, in our offices, and also in our distribution centers, is we did a day of reflection where we gave our employees the day off and said, hey, really find out what's going on in regards to racial equality. And so we had people watching documentaries, we had people watching articles and TED Talks and books and sharing those resources with each other in a variety of different forms and formats. But they wanted to really understand what they were talking about and really understand where the issues and challenges are before they got into, now what do we do as a company and what do we do as an employee base to help support it. And so I think that in of itself can be sometimes an impediment for people to action or for people to get involved.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Reggie. You know, sitting here reflecting on it, I think the biggest impediment is vulnerability, and really being willing to say, you don't know all the answers. You don't even understand all your own unconscious biases that you have. And you may think that you're not a racist or not in the group that people are targeting, but the reality of it is we all are. And we're all part of the problem, but we're also all part of the solution. And so I think the impediment is the fact that people are scared to speak up. They're scared to say they don't know because they're afraid they're going to get something wrong. And the reality of it is this is hard, messy work, and it's not easy. And if it was, we wouldn't be talking about it 400 or 500 years later. And but we have to put ourselves in that place to get knocked down and pick ourselves back up and to maybe say the wrong thing, but then to learn why it was the wrong thing that we said it. Because I can't tell you, the number of times that you have the conversations, you guys have all heard this or read it or seen it. It's not new, but why is saying all lives matter not the right response to Black Lives Matter? And so people have to learn that, and they have to be vulnerable to saying the wrong thing so that they can open themselves up to learn. And I think that's a hard thing for humans to do.
Can I add something really quickly?
Please.
One of the things that we talk about, and that I talk about and when I talk about this, is just the difficulty of the vulnerability that Rob just mentioned, right? Because when you're in a leadership position, when you're a manager or a supervisor of people, once again, people look to you for direction. And even from an ego perspective, you're used to being right? You're used to always being the one that says, this is the path that we should go on. And so the difficulty that sometimes people higher up within an organization, and even to some degree, their feeling of risk when there is a topic like this where they don't know a lot, is palatable for them, right? And so sometimes it's easier just to be quiet. Sometimes it's easier just to not take action because there's a risk and there's a fear of getting something wrong or saying something wrong or doing something wrong. And so that's part of the reason why the education, the learning about the topic is so important. But once again, I think there's also that hesitation that goes on to someone who is used to being right all the time, now saying, I don't know, when they don't normally say that in their normal course of work. So just a quick addition to what Rob said.
And I just want to continue down this path of adding on, which is my word of the day is grace. When I looked up the definition just now, it means courteous goodwill. So as Rob said about that vulnerability, as Reggie said about being a leader and, people are looking at you for that direction and that answer. We all have to have that grace for each other if a manager or an employee says the wrong thing, because for whatever reason, they may not be as caught up on that day. We all have to show that to each other and not hold that against them for the rest of their life. We have to be like, oh, well, let's talk about this. So that courteous goodwill goes a long way for all of us to be a part of the solution together.
Well, wonderful, wonderful feedback, and so necessary. These conversations can be uncomfortable, but they're supposed to be. And so to have that good human nature is going to help this and this potential change happen easier and quicker. I want to move Paul Collier. You had a question that you submitted ahead of time. Again, I'm happy to ask it on your behalf, but if you'd like to unmute and ask, the mic is yours.
Elizabeth, why don't you ask? Because honestly, I can't even remember it.
I figured that might be the case. I like this one. I will gladly ask. So Paul asked, could you try to articulate some of the economic and non-economic drivers of disparities? It's kind of shifting, but really looking at what are some of these drivers of the disparities we're seeing? And I'm watching for the first of you to unmute.
I'll start. I'll keep it short also. Economic and non-economic disparities.
Drivers for it, yeah. What were drivers for it? Yep.
I think a lot of it has to do with, in my opinion, I believe a lot of it has to do with access to education. That's for me where it starts. That's why I've been on the Denver Public Schools Foundation Board, been involved in my schools, all that good stuff, because you see it firsthand, not only through reports and data, but I believe that is a driver. The other thing that's a driver is generational wealth. You know, Black and brown people don't have that. I'm just saying some do, don't get me wrong, but I would say vast majority do not. Lots and lots of studies about that, from savings to 401k, et cetera. And I also think the other driver for disparity is access to programs like I've mentioned. Mm-hmm. Many times there are groups, affinity groups that are created to replicate programs that Black and brown people may not have access to. Why? Because they may not be at that level where they'll get picked, right? Or have the money to put themselves through it, or have the time, quite frankly, due to having childcare access and other kinds of things. So those are, in my opinion, some of the drivers.
Yeah. Reggie, please.
Yeah, and just to build on what Priya said, going back to those programs, I like to tell a simple story. And that simple story is, you know, two people who graduate from college with equal ability, equal potential, equal in every way. The reason why the idea around mentorship and allyship is important is because if one of those people, you know, gets showed the ropes, gets showed how to turn in work the right way, gets showed how to dress when they come into the office, gets showed and introduced into additional people within the company so they can begin building a network. It's no surprise over the next 5 years that that person who was given all those advantages will probably rise higher in the company than the person who, once again, was of equal ability, equal potential when they started their career with this company. And to be quite honest, more often than not, the person who isn't given those opportunities is a woman or a person of color, right? And so then as that opportunity gap continues, as they rise up throughout the organization, there's also an economic impact to that as well, right? Because when someone's a senior director and someone's a senior manager, obviously their purchasing ability and a number of things also align with that. So even as we talk about sort of the greater issues, the systemic issues that are there within the company, around the country, excuse me, there's also that economic and opportunity gap that exists within our respective organizations, not just here in Denver, but also around the country and around the world, right? And that has a trickle effect to communities. It has a trickle effect to education. There's a trickle effect all along the way. And so any opportunities that we have as leaders to kind of begin to level that playing field and provide opportunities and provide access to those additional projects or those additional networking opportunities or that additional exposure attributes to the greater challenge that we're trying to resolve, not just with, you know, what's happening in communities, but also what happens in our respective offices and organizations.
Yeah.
I should not follow Reggie because that was very well said. And always telling a story is more powerful. And Priya, your comments were dead on as well. You know, I guess the only thing that I would add to this is I think one of the drivers is the systemic systems that exist in education, healthcare, and in our criminal justice system were set up by the white majority. And so, you know, we're fooling ourselves if we don't believe that there are biases in those systems that need to be broken down and dealt with. And that is one of the drivers that I am hopeful out of this dialogue and this discussion this time at this place, we might be able to make change. It's not going to be wholesale change. It's not going to happen overnight. That's not the way this kind of change happens. But I'm hopeful that maybe we can get at some of the systemic system issues that will break down some of these barriers that ultimately become very economically driven.
You know, I like this, and I want to expand on this a little bit more. If you guys are willing to kind of talk about any experiences you've had with systemic racism, and whether you've experienced it yourself or witnessed it, how did you react to that? How did you challenge it? How did you overcome it? And if you have anything to add about how we can start changing these systemic racism that we've been talking about, please offer that as well. But if you're willing to share any examples of what you've seen or experienced yourself. Rob, you're muted. Reggie's up.
Well, I'll just talk about how it feels. And I would actually even welcome anybody on this call who would want to follow my quick story to chime in as well. Because for me, because I don't want to go into just one specific incident, but the level of frustration that you have when you know that you have ability and you see people within your organization passing you by I can't even speak to how incredibly frustrating that is. And so once again, just really speaking from the heart, there was a period of time for me where I felt like I was just stuck at senior manager and nothing was breaking for me. And I felt like I had all this experience and just nothing was happening. And to be quite honest, you know, it was something that, you know, I went to therapy and talked about. And, you know, I'll be honest and say it impacted my marriage. And I'll be honest and say that it affected my mood when I came into work because, you know, that feeling of not being able to have a fair shot at opportunities that are available to you or that were available to you, just feels like the world is stacked against you, and there's a wall that you can't climb, and it doesn't matter, you know what letters you have behind your name and degrees, and it doesn't matter what experiences that you bring to the table and whatnot. I was lucky enough that there were some things that broke for me very soon after that, and from a personal perspective, it was a changing a mindset of just saying, I'm just going to be authentically who I am, and I'm going to work for an organization that respects that, or a department within this company that respects that, or a team that respects that. And once I mentally made that pivot, I was lucky that things began to happen for me after that. But there was a period of time where I beat my head against the wall, truthfully, trying to figure out at times what I thought was wrong with me versus, you know, what, you know, the organization didn't recognize. And so I use that because I am sure there are people within your respective organizations that felt the same way that I did when things weren't happening. And so we wonder why, you know, people of color leave your respective organizations, and it's not the only reason why some become entrepreneurs, but sometimes it's what drives them to say, I'm just going to take my idea, whatever it is, and go with it. And sometimes it's just because they felt like they don't have a fair shake. And there was a time in my career where I definitely felt the same way.
Well, I appreciate you being so open. Thank you for that. Priya, I know this is
Yes, I will add, yes, Reggie, thank you for sharing that and your vulnerability. I think majority of Black and Brown people have felt the same way. Because there has been times when I have seen firsthand when leaders have said, there is a woman up there already, as if there was only one slot. There's already a Black or brown person up there, as if there's only one slot. And that is why people do go start their own businesses, because that is not a shared value of theirs as far as it being like one slot. I have literally had the words, and I quote, "You are moving up too fast," by a leader in human resources. And I quote, and how do I know this? I still have the emails today. Because after these words sat, I repeated it as if I didn't hear did I hear this right? So, and I quote, "Although you are the best person for this role, I need you to support X and ensure he is successful before he retires." Quote, "If you get this promotion, how is your family going to manage, because we know your husband travels a lot?" I am a very religious person. I'm also a Christian. When I tell you, by the time you come out of that room, it's almost as if it was a compliment. Like, those didn't sound like compliments, but if you were there and heard the context, it was almost as if they were complimenting you, right? And also in my reviews, the highest you can get is a 5. Never got one less than that. I'm gonna go ahead and say maybe a year, because I can't imagine, right? Let's just pretend. But that's when I realized those don't matter. That was my experience and how I perceived it and how I took it as far as reviews, right? That to me doesn't mean much. But again, that's my learning and my takeaway. What I was going to say is, what I learned is a lot is influenced by a company's culture. And I used to think that I could be that catalyst of change. I was sitting at the table, right? Until somebody would tell me, no, there's only 5 spots here. It can only be for these people, blah, 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 right? Like, those things did happen. I mean, other people can attribute to it. It wasn't like I was the only person in the room and it was like my imagination. But what I was going to say is, I quickly realized that there were other companies that were aligned with my values today, and their culture fit me better. And instead of me, I ended up coming to the point where I was like, I refuse to die working for this company. That is how I literally felt. Regardless of my 401k, pension, all of that stuff, when you're in your 40s, I'm just gonna tell you, goes out the window, because you're like, I'm not gonna die at a company with this type of a culture, because it's not for me anymore. It was in my 20s, I didn't know any better, right? So my point is, don't wait. Do the best you can. Work hard, but sometimes you got to make that change and find a company whose culture is better aligned with your values.
Wow, Priya, I could not move my face any differently than I was. I'm shocked to hear those quotes from that email, and I appreciate you sharing that. That's incredibly important to hear. Thank you. Rob?
Well, I'm not sure there's anything I could say that would be more articulate and better than what was just said by both Reggie and Priya. I guess the only thing that I would add is, I mean, we've all probably experienced it in our own way. You know, growing up Jewish, there were certainly times I was excluded or couldn't join things or whatever, pales in comparison to the stories that were just told. But we've also all witnessed it. I have 2 African-American nephews and a Pakistani niece. And when we talk around the kitchen about how many times African Americans have been pulled over by my own is being.
We're kind of losing your connection.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Well, we can right now. Let's try it again. Let's keep going. If it happens again, I'll let you know, and maybe you can log off, log back on, and we'll keep going until you're back. But keep going, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Where did you lose me? I don't want to repeat.
The last I heard was you were talking about your nieces and nephews.
Yeah. So what I was saying is we've all witnessed it. I have 2 African American nephews and a Pakistani niece. And so when we sit around the kitchen table at dinner talking, the number of times that my 2 African-American nephews have been pulled over by cops versus my own boys being pulled over from cops, you know, is significant. When I travel with them, they always get pulled out of the TSA line. Always. I mean, it doesn't matter where we're going, what we're doing, when we're doing it. And I know it's hard when you're standing in the TSA line. It's really hard to feel like I have the right to go up and ask. But I have now, you know, the first couple of times I stood there silently. Now I go up very politely to the TSA rep and I say, "Are you kidding me? Are you telling me both these boys were randomly pulled out of this line?" For that. And nothing's going to change. They're still going to get pulled over. They're still going to get searched, but I'm saying something. And I think, you know, if you listen to Priya's story, if you're involved in that company and you hear those kinds of things, you have to say something. You have to stand up. And I think, you know, again, I've probably oversaid it, but, you know, people criticize me inside my own company because I sent a memo out when this first started. And I said, you know, the reason that we're still having this discussion is because the white majority has allowed it to happen. Mm-hmm. And people did not like that comment. But I will say, I have never been more proud of a comment I've made because it's the truth. And so, you know, again, although I haven't experienced it in the way that, you know, the other two have just expressed very personally their own thing, I have a role in it if I don't say anything. I'm just as complicit if I don't say something. And so, you know.
Thank you, Rob. That's the leadership we need. It's so true. And as we start looking to close out, I want to share a story that I experienced recently, just in that I was going through one of these kinds of calls, and there was a facilitator who had us all imagine certain circumstances. And what she did was she asked that all the people of color on the call to please remember a time when you experienced racism or some kind of systemic breakdown in the system. And then everybody took a moment to think. And then she asked all the white people on the call to imagine a time that you've experienced the feeling of not feeling like you're a part of the room or a part of what's happening. What was pointed out after that is her wording was very specific. She told the people of color to remember a time. She told the white people on call, imagine a time. Because we sometimes do have to imagine those experiences where people of color are recognize them every day it's happening. And I really, that meant a lot to me because it's true. And the more we all recognize it, and Rob, the more we all speak up, we're all a part of that. So it's so incredibly important. So I thank you guys for sharing so vulnerably. It's really helpful for everybody to understand really the specifics of what's happening and the real life experiences. I want to end with, Priya, did you unmute? Feel free.
Yep, I was just going to mention one thing about that imagine part. At American Express, a leader said something to the effect of, as we were going through like talking about this, a leader said, imagine being a white person walking into a boardroom and the boardroom is surrounded by all Black men. How would you feel? Everybody was like, oh, hell no, that would never happen. We're like, we know. But when you are a white person, you imagine that, now you can kind of see the difference, right?
Yep.
Sorry, I had to mention that.
No, absolutely. And that was similar to the experience she gave us, actually, the exercise. So I know I've asked you guys this in several different ways already, but as we end, what I always like to do is ask, what is it that we can do, this alumni network? What can we do? What's an action step? What's some advice you have? What is it that we can do to help move this forward? Whether it's specific to your industry, whether it's specific to something you're passionate about or working on, please give us, as the Alumni Network, advice on what we can do to push this forward and help. Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Thank you.
You know, mine's the easiest. You know, I would encourage you to talk in your companies or whatever organizations you're affiliated with about the CEO Pledge. I would ask that you push your leaders to join into the pledge, and and help us continue the dialogue.
Absolutely. And resources, Kirsten Vermeulen's on this call, and she put a link also in the chat about how to find out more about it. We'll also send it out as a recap about the CEO pledge. So thank you. Priya, I saw you unmuted, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the one thing that we can all do as leaders, every single person on this call, is to be that voice for equity. It takes practice. So start practicing. Nothing is holding you back. And intentionally think of people that bring different perspectives and are diverse. You have to intentionally do that. It's not just gonna come, you gotta seek it out. And many, if not like just through commercials, advertisements, one can easily tell when a company is checking the box or having it as a genuine priority. So practice.
Love it. Reggie?
Follow up quickly, and it's very similar to what Rob and Priya said, but I'll take a little bit of a different tack. And that is, like my colleagues have said already, it starts with personal accountability. And so the question I would have for everyone is, how are you today and in the future advocating for someone who's different than you? So not, you know, advocacy is a little bit different than just, you know, doing something or making a slight change. But advocating at work, advocating in your community, advocating at church, advocating for someone different than you on the sports teams that your kids play on. But how are you personally taking the challenge to advocate for someone different than you going forward? And that's something I think that everyone on this call can do. And that someone can do different than you can mean a lot of different things, obviously. But that's what I would leave with the members of this group.
That's wonderful. And Heather, you summarized this so beautifully. And I'd love for others on the call to just add in any takeaways you've gotten from this call, what you're feeling right now after this. I think what Priya, Rob, and Reggie gave us, I want to thank you three from the bottom of my heart. These conversations are critically important. We should have been having these a long time ago, but moving forward is what's important. I'm proud to say that at the foundation, we're going to be doing these once a month, where we're going to have a focus on racial equity and some kind of focus around what we can be doing in different areas. And so I thank you all so much for being on this call. You'll see on the screen some upcoming virtual voices. We have one about back to school, where we're really going to talk to educators from different areas about what this back to school has looked like. And then the race in the workplace will be our next racially focused one. I will say that every virtual voice is going to have a racial equity lens. That's very important to us now, and so we will ensure that's the case. But we're going to dive deeper in that racial race in the workplace. And Priya, you said something that we're going to focus on a little bit more is instead of, I saw this recently, instead of a cultural fit, it's a cultural add, because people are adding to what you bring. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. I hope you guys will join us. And then one final push, we do have Impact Denver applications open. Again, to what Priya said, tell people about these opportunities. They can be wonderful drivers to success and growth. Shows that you're caring deeply about your colleagues, your team. Applications are due on August 4th for the next term. We also have Impact Denver nonprofit community project proposals. This is something where we work with nonprofits. So if you're a nonprofit, you can submit a project proposal for something you'd like some help with. And our Impact Denver teams will then work on it with you directly. We've seen some wonderful successes, and one nonprofit per session will get a grant from the foundation to help in the work you're doing. So we hope that you guys will push this out. I want to thank the speakers again. Priya, Rob, Reggie, thank you so much for your vulnerability, for the resources and the talents, and thank you for doing your part. I hope that our entire alumni network on this call will continue to do your part and continue to learn and listen. And thank you all so much for being here. We will see you soon.